All right, we are live.
Okay. This meeting will now come to order. Welcome to the January 9th meeting of the City of Asheville Noise Advisory Board. My name is Jessica Thomason. I am the chair of the Noise Advisory Board. I'll introduce each agenda item and facilitate this meeting to help our audience follow along. All committee members and staff are participating virtually today. We are streaming live on our virtual engagement hub, which is accessible through the virtual engagement hub link on the front page of the city website and also linked on the Noise Advisory Board page. For those of you out there with us today, welcome. I will now go ahead and introduce all the board members who are participating virtually. Please make sure to mute your microphone when you are not speaking. When you have a question or would like to speak, unmute your microphone. Board members, as I call your name, please acknowledge your presence. Rick Freeman.
Present.
Reb Haslip.
Present.
Liliana Woody. You're muted.
Present.
It's not a meeting, not a virtual meeting unless somebody leaves their microphone off. All good. Hey, I'm sure it'll probably be me in a little bit. Jeff Santiago.
Here.
David Ledger.
Present.
Carmelo Papilonio.
Present.
Also joining us today is Council Liaison Antoinette Mosley.
Antoinette is not going to be present today. She did let me know she'd be absent.
Okay, thanks for letting us know. Also present is Noise Administrator Todd Justice. Is Todd with us today?
I am not sure where Todd is at.
Okay, well, we'll go ahead and start. This meeting is now called to order. First order of business is approval of the minutes of our last meeting from December 12th. Can I get a motion to approve the meeting minutes from December 12th?
Move. I move.
Reb moves. Can I get a second?
I'll second.
Carmelo seconds. Thank you so much. Board members, when I call your name, please say A or nay in regards to the motion to approve the minutes. Rick Freeman?
A.
Reb Haslip?
Yay.
Liliana Woody?
Hey.
And David Ledger?
Yay.
And A for me as well. Okay, so we've approved the minutes from our December 12th meeting. So, all right, so moving on to the staff report. I understand that Todd's not here. For the board, I hope everyone's had an opportunity to take a look at this. It's actually a new format, as you'll see on the agenda. So it's basically, it's now grouped by complaints by source by month. And then it's followed by a graph of the type of complaints, and then number of multifamily complaints and the status of investigated complaints. So has everyone had an opportunity to take a look at that? Yeah. Any thoughts on that? Do we feel like it's easier to read?
I think it is. I also appreciate the work.
Yeah, it's interesting to be able to see the side-by-side comparison from month to month, especially when it comes to complaint type. Rick, you have your hand up?
Yeah, I like it. I agree. I think the only request I would make is that we start to see month 2022 compared to month 2023. So that we can see how we're doing year over year, since complaints are one not perfect measure of whether we're meeting our mission of reducing excess noise.
Gotcha. That's a good point. Haley, you have your hand up.
Yeah, so we did try to achieve that. So let me bounce back over to this tab real quick. So we've actually launched a new public dashboard that kind of coincides with the staff report, and it will be able to show you the month-to-month comparisons, except for some reason it's not showing up right now. That is weird. Hold on, I can pull it up from over here. I'll have to fix that link later. Okay, so again, I'm sorry about that link not working on the agenda. I'll have to look into that. It was working the other day, but we made some tweaks on this since then, and maybe it broke the link. But basically, I know it's kind of hard to see on here probably, but we've made it so you can compare 2023 to 2022 and to 2021 by month, starting from when the ordinance went into effect.
Very organized. Good work.
Thank you. This was a big lift on Daniel's part. He did a really great job on it. And Claire Richardson helped out a lot too as well. So thank her too as well.
Okay, great. That's really helpful.
So I just wanted to show that to you all.
I just had one question on here from the status of investigated complaints, but I can always take it up with Todd after the fact if no one here can answer that. And that is just the ongoing investigation monitoring is like, it says 0 across the board until December, and then it says 34. I figured that might be just a mistake, or maybe that's something that was not counted until December as cumulative.
I'm thinking that it probably means that he's closed out the complaints with another closure code would be my guess. So ideally, we shouldn't have too many ongoing investigating monitoring, because after a certain point of investigation, we will close the case. We can always reopen a case if complaints continue to come in. But there is a point where we like to get to closure with cases. And so I'm thinking that that's probably what that is indicating, that there's just that we've closed the cases. However, you can always email Daniel or Todd, and maybe Todd will show up in a little bit and we could go back to that question as well.
Okay, all good. Well, thanks for all the work that you put into this, because this definitely, I feel like, makes it a lot easier to see everything all at once, and especially, with that other document that we'll get. So
thank you for the positive feedback. It's really nice to hear.
Yeah, thanks for that. Any other questions or comments from the board before we move on? Okay. So next order of business is the old business, which is the waste hauler update. And is this because we have this on here twice, both under, we have the recommendation. And so was the update that this is something you were going to give us, right, Haley? Or somebody from the city was going to give us?
I think that was something Rick was going to provide. And then, so there was 2 different discussions. I think there was an actual update on the topic of waste hauler, and where you were kind of taking that. And then the second portion is when we discuss the annual report and what's going to go into that.
Okay. Yeah, Rick, didn't you get an update from the city that you were going to share?
Yeah. So it's been a challenge to make progress with the right people in the city, because the leader of that section of the sanitation team has been out on medical leave, and she just came back and is only back like 10 hours a week. So she read my proposal and informed me that there is a broader set of evaluations going on in her part of the city departments, public works in general, that are going to make a bunch of recommendations for future improvements in public works. And she wanted me to consider sort of pushing this off for a month. I said I was not fond of that, because then we'll miss the opportunity to give an update to City Council. So I encouraged her to look at the language that we have and that she could make any recommendations. I think the top thing she was concerned about was in the recommendation, which you will see in the next section. I included the waste haulers in the discussion, and I have a feeling that the direction that this is likely to go is to, at some point, generate RFPs to waste haulers, which means they may not be able to be engaged in the discussion because there's just laws about how that sort of thing works. So my goal is to try again this week to get her attention. And I said she could make adjustments to the language at this stage of the game, as long as the board here approved in general that it was a worthwhile recommendation, which I think we'll cover in the annual report in the next section. Anybody got any questions on that? Just trying to get things done over the holidays are hard.
Yeah.
So that's my plan. We'll proceed.
Okay. All right. Thanks for that.
If I don't hear from her, I'll remove waste haulers from the recommendation, which is the only thing that she shared any concerns about. And since this all just asks City Council to ask the city manager to establish a task force, the exact makeup of that task force would still be driven by the city. So I think we'll be okay.
Okay, great. Thank you for that.
Mm-hmm.
All right, we're going to move on to new business, which is the annual report is the first order of business. So the annual report from the board is due on the, I believe it's the 21st of this month. And so that is put together by myself and Rick as chair and vice chair. And so we have been working on that. And really what it's about is the recommendations that we want to make to City Council after now that we've been meeting for over a year together to make recommendations based on what we've seen from the data that has been gathered through city staff and through public input. So the first thing that we've talked about is we've had the vehicle noise working group that Reb has been spearheading for us. And so that's the first thing that we want to discuss. There's a link in the agenda to the recommendation, if everybody can pull that up, and we're going to just have a discussion about that and what thoughts the board has in terms of this being a recommendation to the city and to City Council. I also, oh no, don't sign me out of this. There we go. And so, Reb, do you want to take us through your recommendation?
Sure. The recommendation is really the first paragraph, and the rest is background information. And I can read it. Task force proposes that the NAB recommend to the City Council that it direct the city manager to empower NAB to work with city staff on a revised ordinance to reduce vehicular noise from intentional engine revving and modified exhaust systems. You'll recall the last time we discussed this, there was some confusion about the precedents that I had found through research, and that those were not necessarily recommendations to the council, but starting points for us to begin to think about what we could do with respect to measures for decreasing noise. But that's the proposal, that's the recommendation. And the rest is background research into what our task force discovered.
Great, thank you. So basically, board, the recommendation is for council to tell the city manager to work with us in revising the ordinance. And so it's basically just asking them to have the city engage with us in order to make that happen. And this is, as we talked about, was something that we saw we could have an opportunity to actually have some impact. As we know, vehicle noise is, especially, in CBD, is something that's been a concern. So I personally think it's a good recommendation that I would love to put forward to City Council to let us have a chance to see if we can't tackle this and work with the city to get somewhere on it. Thoughts from the rest of the board?
Well, I think that makes sense to me. Just a cooperative effort.
I think it makes sense too. It just seems like, Reb, you're trying to hone into some more specific language. I know that we talked about the specific DBs last time, but I mean, the language is probably going to be more important for being out in the field, because this is one of those discretion things like we were talking about. I said last week, but last year, I guess. But yeah, you just want more specific language regarding the mufflers, lack thereof, modifications, and revving and stuff. It sounds like to give more, I guess, discretion to officers out in the field for that.
I think it would be, and that's going to be a negotiated point with APD to see what level of enforcement they're prepared to undertake.
Gotcha. Yeah, sounds good. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think the other part of that is that, seeing some of the research that Reb's done so far, that some things that have worked in terms of signage and things like that in other places like Greenville may be part of a recommendation and a way that we can do some other initiatives that can help with this issue. So on top of not only, I see this as not only revising the ordinance in that regard, but other ways that we can have some actionable things to do that could help with the problem. So any other questions or comments on the recommendation for vehicular noise down? No? Okay. So moving on to the waste hauler recommendation, which again is linked in your agenda to the recommendation, and per what Rick said, just to reiterate, if he can't get a hold of the city employee that's in charge of this, will basically take waste hauler out of the language in terms of having the seat at the table.
Right.
Okay. Task force, yeah, would include. So basically, the sentence that would change would be, this task force would include waste haulers, CBD business owners, CBD residents, and sanitation staff. Its goal, determine a plan that would continue to improve public safety, protect the businesses of the waste haulers, minimize waste pickup costs to CBD businesses, and change morning waste pickup to as late as possible.
Yeah, that's, now that I read it for the 100th time, the protect the businesses of the waste haulers, that might have to go too.
Okay.
And I say that based on what research I've been able to do about other cities that have done this. They haven't necessarily made sure that every one, like I think it was New York, had 95 different waste haulers that were servicing the downtown area.
Mm-hmm.
And by the time they got done dividing up the city into manageable quadrants and taking out RFPs, they didn't necessarily still employ 95 waste haulers, which is probably why city staff wants me to remove them from this, because they should reserve the right to say, here are the 4 zones, making that up. And we're going to take RFP on for each of those zones, and that might only lead to 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 waste haulers, period, if that's what's best for the city. So assume that both of those sentences, those fragment of sentences would come out.
Okay. Questions from the board, comments? Carmelo?
Am I mistaken in interpreting that as there's a possibility that we would do away potentially with one of the waste hauling companies, or I might have misunderstood. Can you elaborate on, because I understand what you mean when you say protect the business of waste haulers, because that was an important point that we talked about in the past few meetings, where it's like we want to figure out the best solution for everyone, including them. And of course, they're not going to be on our side if it affects their business and, you know, it affects their routes in such a way that's, you know, they have to maybe change their numbers of employees or
Or
routes.
get whacked with cattails.
Yeah, which is happening a lot to some of us. But yeah, no, you talked about New York as the example with having, you know, almost 100 different companies or entities, and then some of those you said got dissolved or broken up, or that the figuration changed, or what parallels do you see? What possibilities do you see, and like what do you? Can we talk more about that? Sorry.
Well, we can talk about Rick's opinion, but the objective of the task force is to have experts jump in and make these decisions. And so both of those things, I'm responding to feedback, one email feedback from the leader of this that said this might not be something that waste haulers should be at the table on. And I didn't read the 125-page report from New York, nor the 3-year later update on where they are. But my general understanding was they looked at the urban area and they said, here are segments of the city, contiguous geographical segments of the city, and we're going to open up an RFP for each one of those segments. And we're going to RFP that to a single waste hauler so they can optimize their routes, right? Whereas today, 15 businesses all on the same alley can hire 15 different waste haulers to come in. And that's hypothetically the reason that they have to start at 5 o'clock in the morning, because they have to wait for the other 14 to get out of the way. So my understanding about city contracts and RFPs, if they elect to go that way, they can't really have waste haulers in the negotiation because it will look like they're screwing around and getting the RFP to be written to their satisfaction. So I can't forecast whether the 4 or 5 waste haulers that serve the city will all get a segment. I can't forecast whether there will be 5 segments, 3 segments, 14 segments. That's up to the task force to do that. And I think we need support from the sanitation department when the city manager calls them and says, hey, city council just told me to do this. And here's the recommendation. And we want their support to be willing to look at it. So hence, I was probably overreaching, thinking that we could make a recommendation that would ensure that every waste hauler who has a contract now and makes a certain amount of money now would get exactly what they currently have. I think that's too much reach.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Live and learn.
Yeah, right. That's exactly what we're all doing as part of this, right? Yeah, because
Yeah.
I mean, I thought it made sense too to have them have a seat at the table, but you know, the way that you explained it now, it's like unless you're going to have every single one have a seat at the table, that you know, if they decide to go that route of doing an RFP, then it does seem like it's some sort of like favoritism of some waste haulers had an opportunity to have a seat at the table and others didn't. And so I can definitely see why that would be a concern of the city for sure. So.
And it's even who gets to see the RFP is very controlled. I don't think the residents will be able to get to see the RFP. The residents will be engaged in what they see as the problem and what they're hoping the outcome would be, and et cetera, that sort of thing. And certainly the businesses, if I had a business in the CBD, I'd be saying, as long as you can get my trash out for the same amount I'm paying now, it's the same frequency I'm paying, then I would be happy. But when the city sits down to write an RFP, it has to be behind privacy doors and all that kind of stuff, so that if they go that way, we can't judge. The task force has to decide. And certainly if this gets approved by city council, then NAB will be looking for members of this team that want to be on that task force, right?
Correct. Yep. Okay, thanks for that, Rick. Any other questions or comments about the waste hauler recommendation? Okay, so moving on, citywide ordinance effectiveness survey. So the thought with this in terms of a recommendation to the city is that we know that the original survey that the city created for input about noise had one of the highest levels of civic engagement of surveys that the city has put out. So now what we're thinking is, now that the ordinance has been in effect for over a year, that it would be wise to do a similar survey than was done before to see if we can garner the same amount of engagement. So we have the amount of, we'll get into the next part with the decibel level working update. And we know that Rick and Jeff have been working on that in terms of reaching out to people who have made complaints. But it would be good to get a larger sample. I'm thinking of where the city's at, where residents are at in terms of how effective the noise ordinance has been. I think it'll help us to see if people are just choosing not to, are still seeing some issues or problems, but aren't engaging in the portal to do that, or reporting it, or they feel like it's going great. I think it would be really good to have a larger sample size. So I definitely would like to see about putting that on the recommendation for the city for city council to direct city staff to put resources towards that. Any thoughts or concerns on that?
I agree with your points as well. I mean, just to get a better sense of how everyone is feeling about where we stand and how it's been this past year is important. I think, as a board, as we start diving down and getting more specific as what we've been doing this past year, people with certain issues might be continuing to engage with us, but a lot of other people are just kind of going on with their lives. So I agree with you.
I also think it might help, as this was brought up at our retreat that we did Reb mentioned this, and I know that Rick's mentioned it in the past, is that there may be people who still feel like there's a serious problem with one of these issues, or one of these places, and they've just stopped complaining. So this I see as an opportunity is maybe to address that issue as well. So I think it would be ideal to see since they had so much engagement the first time around, to see if we can't get that same level of engagement again. Any other thoughts on that? No? Okay. So moving on, decibel levels working group update, which is
Liliana, you're muted.
Oh.
Sorry, Jessica. I just saw Liliana's trying to speak.
Yeah. If we do have an influx in one area of continuing complaints, how are we going to let those folks know that we're making an effort and trying to resolve some of that?
When we have, there's been some different engagement with folks that are complaining specifically about several places, like the same places over and over again, and so there's part of that is from the noise administrator side of that, in terms of, yes, these people are being fined. Yes, this has happened. Some of it, I'll use salvage station as an example. There's continuing amount of complaints about the salvage station. We're trying to get them to engage directly with the residents that are complaining, to let them know about some things that they're doing to make changes to help with noise mitigation. And so there's those elements of that. I mean, part of that also is the work that Rick's going to talk about now with the working group updates of just what what the continued work is going to be that he's spearheading through into 2023. So that's really it. I try to respond to everybody, any emails that I get personally that people send, and I know that the noise administrator's office is doing the same thing. So that's as much as I think we can do right now is get more data and figure out what else we can, how we can move forward. But that's a good point. One of the things I'm thinking about is the hospital. And so that's a perfect example of wanting to get this survey out on a bigger, on a wider scale, is to see if people want to just to see if there's anything we're missing as part of it too. Right. So
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah. Rick, you have your hand up.
Yeah. So I think that opens a question that I don't know if I'd say we struggle with it. But the boundary or the borderline between the work we do and the work Todd and his team does is by definition flexible. So in this, we all get a staff report every month. And we have an obligation as members of this team to look at that staff report and say, oh, this is all working great. Or wait a minute, why did there continue to be so many multifamily dwelling issues? Any one of us can put an agenda on this meeting to discuss with Todd and everyone else whether there's some additional action we should be taking to try to move the needle effectively, right? So that's what begot the work on the decibel group, because we're looking at the decibel report. The vast majority are no violation found. Yet you can see that there continues to be complaints from people around the same noise source. So I asked myself, gee, is this working right? Is it not working right? Have people given up, or were they satisfied with the action that the compliance team took? And that's how we found ourselves in the survey. So any one of the board members can look at any one of these and should, if they have passion around it. Reb and company took passion around the vehicle noise because there was a strong voice from a citizen, right? So you got strong voices from citizens, and anybody in this team can then raise their hand and say, look, I want to make a proposal to the board to go investigate this problem. So we can be more proactive if we choose. And of course, anytime we choose to be more proactive, it's always good to shake hands with Todd and see if he's already trying to be more proactive. So Liliana, in the first year before you came on board, the compliance team made a lot of effort to make relationships with building managers for multifamily apartments and to try to engage those folks to take action when there's a apartment tenant that's making noise and causing trouble and all that sort of thing. And the compliance team felt that they made a lot of good progress on a very big thing. So, some of them, they have the capacity to do. Some of these issues, they need help from us to push on city council to get them help so they can go tackle that problem a different way than they do today, right? So as everybody learns how to read these staff reports, it's up to you to use your brain to ask yourself if this is making sense. And then we can take it on if the board agrees that that's a good place to go.
Yeah, and we saw, for instance, over the last year, while we're still there's still a challenge with the waste haulers in the central business district, there was a significant amount of effort put into dealing with the waste haulers in other residential areas, and it's helped for complaints to dropped significantly in other neighborhoods outside of the CBD, just with them getting those relationships with the waste haulers and having those conversations and making sure that waste haulers indeed did know where what the ordinance was for residential neighborhoods and how far they had to be from a residential space at what time. So that's definitely that's another example. Same thing with us trying to wrap our heads around, like Rick mentioned about the multifamily housing, right? Because we kept seeing a really high number of complaints there, but yet we didn't have the data or the information. We now know there's 64 apartment complexes and over 11,000 apartments, for instance, in townhomes. And so having that data helped us to figure out, what percentage of these complaints, how high of a percentage of these complaints were, and then going in and also establishing sort of what those apartment complexes and their managers do to sort of mitigate complaints and cutting things off at the pass. So, that's just from us going through all of the data that we're getting. Every time we get a staff report or the full report, that's the link's not working now, but what Haley showed us, that's going to be the new one. For instance, every time we get that, I go through it prior to this meeting and see if there's anything, especially if there's any trends or anything that's happening, to then be able to bring up and ask about what's happening with this issue, and then how is there a way that we can support city staff in this issue that they have, and what's appropriate. So, hence the whole trying to work things out with the salvage station and the residents, and trying to be liaison some of that happening. Hopefully that helps. Okay, Rick, you want to give us an update on the decibel levels working group?
Haley, can you show the document? I got it in too late to be linked.
Let's see. Yes, I just got to get it up real quick. Here it is.
So the objective in the annual report is just to share with City Council where we are. Okay. And so this document summarizes what we continue to plan to do. And in summary, what it says is with support from compliance staff, which we've already arranged for, and we have confirmed that their measurement devices properly measure both dBA and dBc, that we'll work with the complainants who have replied to us saying that they are willing to have further work done to understand the circumstances under which they feel that the sound levels that they're experiencing are diminishing their quality of life. And we will plan to go out to their locations, interior and exterior, and first of all, take some ambient noise measurements when the alleged noise source is not actually producing any sound. And this is a lesson learned from the challenges that the compliance team had in measuring noise from Mission Hospital, because their first efforts, that noise was drowned out by the traffic on Biltmore Avenue. And so there was a lot of fits and starts. So the goal here is to get out to these locations. If the noise source is seasonal, as is the case for certain kinds of noise sources, to wait till we're near that season so that ambient can be taken in a time of the year that is approximate the same time of year as the noise source is, and then take both dBA and dBc measurements. And if you'd scroll up enough so that people can see the chart, Haley. When it comes to dBA, take these decibel measurements and show what the sound level is like in the practical world, inside and outside of their residence when the actual noise source is active, as a way to both educate the complainant, right? So if when the noise source is active, the sound level inside their house is 30 dBA, well, that's the equivalent of whispering. So then we have a conversation with a complainant that says, is somebody whispering inside your house really diminishing your quality of life and your that sort of thing? So this is a way to engage that conversation and to collect some objective data when the noise sources are there, and then evaluate that data and see where it leads us. We do the same thing with DBC, but there isn't a standard chart like this. There are hundreds of these standard charts that equate dBA to rocket ships and whispering and conversation. And so we would do that with all the people who were willing to have us out there, and we would collect that data and we would bring it back and see what it leads us to understand. And so that's what we're telling City Council we're going to do. And at the end of that time, we'll know whether we've gotten some data that tells us something about the effectiveness of the current decibel limits in the ordinance. Questions? So the work for the existing committee is to essentially, in a short term, like the next month or so, is to divide the no violation decibel reports and complainants into those where the source is seasonal, outdoor sounds from music and restaurants and so on and so forth, and those that are not seasonal. And we can try to work within the constraints of the compliance team to make some progress on the non-seasonal ones, and see what we can do to knock those off and collect some valid data in those cases. So that's it.
Any other questions or comments on the update that will go to City Council? No?
Cool.
Okay. Any other comments or questions about the this info for the annual report? If not, then we're going to move on to officer elections for chair and vice chair for 2023. So just to give some information for maybe a reminder of the responsibilities and duties of the chairperson, and in his or her absence, the vice chairperson. These are the things that they are responsible for. Presides at all meetings on the board and ensures the work of the board is accomplished. To this end, the chairperson must exert sufficient control over the meeting to eliminate irrelevant, repetitious, or otherwise unproductive discussion. At the same time, the chairperson must ensure that all viewpoints are heard and considered in a fair and impartial manner. The chair cannot make rules related to the conduct of meetings or board procedure without approval of the full board. Appoints board members to temporary subcommittees with the approval of the full board. Approves the agenda discussion items prior to distribution. Prepares the annual report of the board each year. Signs correspondence and represents the board before the City Council with the formal approval of the board by motion and vote. The chair or a quorum of the board may call a special meeting. The chair may also cancel a regular meeting. So with that, can we get I'm going to ask for a nomination for chair from the group.
And it is okay to nominate the current chair if you wish.
I nominate the current chair.
Okay, Reb nominates the current chair.
I second.
Who's
Rick? Rick seconded.
Rick seconded. Okay. I'll do a roll call now for nomination for chair. Liliana Woody,
Aye. For you.
Carmelo Papilonio.
Would you consent to being the chair again?
Yes, I would.
Then I nominate you.
Jeff Santiago.
Yes.
Dave Ledger.
Yes, for Jessica.
And I will take that. So, thank you. Okay, so now we need to do a, can I get a nomination for the vice chair? Currently Rick Freeman, who you can also vote for, again, as the vice chair.
I nominate Rick Freeman.
Great. I will second for Rick. Now we will do a vote. Liliana Woody,
Rick.
Carmelo,
Rick, if you're good with it.
Jeff Santiago,
Yay.
Dave Ledger.
Yes, for Rick.
How about you, Rick?
Let's make it unanimous.
All right. Okay, so then it is approved. I will keep my position as chair. Rick will keep his position as vice chair. Thank you all very much. Moving forward. So we're just burning through this, y'all. So the next order of business is public comment. Haley, do we have anybody on the line for public comment right now?
Let me just refresh the page real quick to make sure nobody's snuck in here. No, we do not have any callers on the line today.
Okay. All right. Well, I guess, is there any other questions or comments from the board at this time? Okay. Oh, Jeff, you're raising your hand.
Yeah, I'm just trying to get to my mute button. Yeah, I just want to thank you both, Jessica and Rick, for your positions as chair and vice chair and all the efforts you've put into this. And I think it's good to have you both continue to move forward with the momentum we've been building. So thank you.
Thanks, Jeff.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. And thanks to the board and happy to have these new board members as well as, some that have been around for a while. As everybody knows, this has not been an easy new board, right? With dealing with noise. And so I appreciate everybody's willingness to put the time and energy into this. And thank you to the staff too. So I know Antoinette's not here today. And thank you to Haley. I mean, really, you've been amazing to work with. So we really appreciate all your work. And I know you won't be with us forever, but thanks for pointing us in the right direction and working through this with us.
You're very welcome. It's been great working with you all, and I've been proud to see how far we've come in a year. I think you guys are on a great track for 2023.
Yeah, I'm excited. I'm actually really excited to see what we can do this year and just see if we can get some really concrete goals figured out for this next year. So if there are no objections, we will adjourn this meeting. Are there any objections to adjourning this meeting? All right, hearing none, this meeting is adjourned. Our next regular meeting of the Noise Advisory Board will be held on Monday, February 13th, day before Valentine's Day.
Woo-hoo.
And the meeting, will be held virtually. Thank you all for being here today. Thanks for your time.
All right.
Happy New Year, everyone.
Happy New Year, all.
Happy New Year.
Take care.
Okay.
Happy New Year.